Okay, welcome to the Personal Tanya Day 56. We're on chapter 25 of Tanya, part 2. And today we're going to talk about the most meaningful thing that you can do. Think about that. You know, I've spent time with people on their deathbeds. And you ask them, so what are you most proud of? And sometimes the answer ain't pretty. It's just not pretty. You know, when somebody tells you the most greatest achievement in his life was decreasing his golf handicap or his, a particular recipe that he got from somewhere, you realize that there's got to be more to life. So what is the most meaningful thing that you can do? And what we're going to explain is that it's an eternal and timeless connection that we can forge as our soul connects with Almighty God. Remember, God is timeless. God is eternal. So when a mortal being connects with an eternal God, even for 1 minute or 5 minutes in a mitzvah or in Torah, then that bond is not 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 1 minute. It's an eternal, timeless bond because God is timeless, right? So this actually becomes the most meaningful thing we can possibly do. Let me put it into the context. So we learned in the previous lesson how the hidden love within us prevents us, gives us a repulsion from repudiating our connection to God. We cannot be disconnected from God. Our soul is like a candle which aspires to connect to its source. And the worst thing you can do to the candle is to cut it off from its source. You'd be killing it. You'd be killing the candle. In much the same way, the soul cannot be disconnected from its source in God. That is who we are. That is how we were designed. Life is a game of hide and seek, and we didn't get the memo until later in life about what that it's a game of hide and seek and what it is that we're seeking. Tanya gives us the memo. Here it is. It took us a couple decades to reach here, but we finally got it. Better late than never. What we're seeking is our connection to God. The worst thing we could possibly do is to cut off that connection to God through idolatry. And what we've learned in this shortcut method of Tanya, of how to reach self-mastery, is that every single sin, no matter how big, no matter how small, is essentially an act of divorce from God. So this hidden love that we have within us, that motivates us to want to connect with God and to not want to disconnect from God, can motivate us to serve God in thought, in speech, and in action. For example, when it comes to studying Torah, which takes enthusiasm to getting over the laziness and the sloth, getting out of bed and sitting there. You think it's easy to steig away and learning like this, to go like this and study when you're not in the mood, when you're studying, we're studying Talmud now, and there's parts of this Talmudic sugya, the analysis, which are just so intellectual aerobics, and they're so far removed from our personal relevant experiences of our lives. But to be able to do that requires an overcoming of laziness and sloth in Torah study, and that is motivated by the hidden love that says, I want to connect. I'm a candle, and I'm pulling upwards. Think of the magnetic energy, that energy that pulls that candle upwards is powerful. You can't stop that candle from pulling upwards. You can put it upside down. You can do all sorts of things, but that candle is always going to go upwards. Right? It's always going to go upwards because your soul just cannot control its urge and desire to connect with God. So you can channel that awareness into motivating your Torah study, like the yoke of an ox, says the Alter Rebbe, the burden of a donkey, to learn Torah with speech, with your mouth, and with your mind, with concentration, with thought and speech. Same thing with prayer. Not only to pray the words, to say the words, but to actually feel the words with kavanah. And tzedakah as well. Your animal soul, your evil inclination might tell you, what do you have to waste your money? You're giving it away. You could use it on your own luxury. No, it gives us, the hidden love gives us the enthusiasm and the motivation, the alacrity, the strength and courage of a lion, says the Alter Rebbe, to be able to motivate us to give that tzedakah with joy and with a lot of passion. How do we reach this place to be able, what's the method? To be able to motivate our thought, speech, and our action is simply to remind yourself that you would be willing to die for God. It's that easy. You'd simply remind yourself, what would happen if somebody put a gun to your head, God forbid, and said, I want to kill you unless you go on television and say, I do not believe in the God of Israel. Would you do that? You'd be willing to die for that, right? Remember Daniel Pearl, executed by the Taliban or something out there in Afghanistan? He was a very secular Jew. It's a very, very secular Jew. But he said, his last words on that taped gruesome video, I was born a Jew and I'll die a Jew. That's it. So when you remind yourself that you be willing to die for God, then you channel your awareness and say that every mitzvah connects me with God, every sin disconnects me from God. And therefore, this mitzvah is certainly less painful, or avoiding this sin is certainly less painful than the pain of death, right? If I'm going to give tzedakah 10%, or if I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes studying Torah, that's certainly less painful than death, and I'd be willing to do that. So therefore, it's a worthwhile endeavor. What happens when we do a mitzvah is we're connecting with God's naked will. That's what we're doing. It's God's unfiltered, undiluted, explicit, unequivocal desire. So when I do a mitzvah, I'm becoming intimately bound with God through the mitzvah, which is his unfiltered desire. Both our godly soul and our animal soul, as well as the garments of our soul, thought, speech, and action, all of them are connected with God during the time of the mitzvah. It's an act of self-mastery, and we're reaching self-mastery. And that's why when we're connecting with God, this connection is eternal. This connection is timeless, because God is timeless and God is eternal. So when you're connecting to infinity, if you're laying a connection to infinity, that's an infinite connection, because everything infinity does is infinite. So if I'm connecting to God, I'm doing an act of infinity, whether it's through mitzvahs, whether it's through Torah. The more mitzvahs, the more Torah, the more infinite connections. I am doing something that's making me eternal, something far more meaningful than anything else I could possibly ever achieve in my life. That's a wrap for part 2 of chapter 25. We'll continue tomorrow with part 3 of chapter 25.